hello? The B-roll is a bit more ominous than I intended, but I mean, it is called Fireball Island. Here we go. You have 3 island pieces and they only fit one way. Then stick these 2 boards called the scrims on the side front and the back side of the island. Put Vul-Kar in the star-shaped spot in the middle, but face them towards the helipad. You also have 2 bridges and a ladder that are put on the centerpiece as well. Then stick these 7 trees in their spots around the island with the brown arrow facing Vul-Kar. Now 6 orange marbles, these are the special edition ones versus the standard ones, but both are called Ember marbles, and 6 of them go in the fire pits around the island. You also put 1 fireball marble, or these red ones in the scar, and the other 3 go on the cataclysm tracker. Now the heart of Vul-Kar is placed right next to Vul-Kar himself in the spot shown here. Shuffle the treasure tokens and randomly place them face up in spots that have this symbol. Now this is called the maw, where you keep next to the island with the lucky penny on it. Every player picks a figure with their matching reference card and they get placed into the Hello-copter, yes, pronounced Hello-copter. Then you take these snapshot cards and put them face up, shuffle the souvenir cards, give 1 to each player, and shuffle the action deck and deal 2 face down to each player. The youngest player goes first. So how to play this cool island lava fireball game? Now the whole point is to gain the most points from treasures and snapshots before you get picked up back in the helicopter again. On your turn, you have 4 things to do and in this specific order. First, if you're knocked over, then pick up your figure back to its space. If it's on more than 1 space, then you can pick up any space to revive on. Couple other things, if you're in a river or lava chute, then follow the flow to the end and stand up, and if you have multiple spaces to choose from, pick one. If you manage to get knocked off the island completely, pick any cave to start from, but don't roll the die and don't use the cave. And if you're in any other random spot, choose a close space next to you. Okay, so picking up your character if it's knocked down is the first action. Now the second action is to play an action card from your hand, and you have to move the entire amount unless you come to an unstable space, which automatically stops you like the ladder or the bridges. But you can choose to use or to not use the following action. Now for your first move, the first step has to be taken from the helicopter to the helipad, meaning if I have an action that tells me to move 4 steps, then it would be 1, and then 2, 3, and 4. When you move, you can go in any direction, but on your specific turn, you can't change direction. So let's say I choose to go right here for the first turn, and then if I want to, I can turn back the other way on a separate turn. You also can't be on the same space as another player, so you'll pass them and you'll also ignore these spaces. So let's say someone was on a snapshot. When I pass them, I don't take a snapshot. Speaking of these spaces, each space is a light brown line separated by mud, so you can't stop on these muddy areas. Tree roots like this one don't do anything to your movement, so just go ahead and move past them. If you start or land on a cave, then you get to roll a die. Based on what you roll, you get to place yourself in the cave that matches that particular number and then keep moving. If all the caves that have the number occupied, then you don't get to leave your cave and then stop moving. So let's say I have 3 movement points and I use the first one to land in this cave and roll a 3. Then I get to use the remaining 2 movement points to go ahead and keep going after I land at cave 3. Now the bridges and the ladder that we set up earlier are unstable spaces, so if you enter one, you stop moving, but the cool thing is if someone's already there, then go ahead and pass them by moving to the first available space and keep moving. Couple of things on movement. The snapshot space that I mentioned earlier means that you can take a matching snapshot color and symbol unless you already have one of that color, or if snapshot cards from that space have been taken by other players, or third option, if another player is already in that space. Now if you start on these red triangles next to the treasure, or if you pass them, then you can grab the treasure token next to it, but keep it face down in front of you, and you can always grab more than 1 treasure on your turn if you pass by multiple slabs of treasure spots. There's 1 space at the top with the red diamond, which is the ultimate treasure, aka the heart of Vul-Kar. Now for this one, you get like any other treasure by being in the red triangle space. If you do grab it though, put a fireball on the scar, and once you gain this treasure, any player that passes you can steal it from you. Okay, so we're still in the second action, but let's go ahead and shift from the moving part of the action cards to the actions on action cards. Now remember, these are optional, unlike the movement points, and this rotate symbol means you can rotate Vul-Kar in any direction or the trees in any direction. Okay, so here's the fun part. Some actions will let you launch an Ember marble. When you launch these marbles, you can only use 1 finger to push it, so no flicking or some crazy old school marble game technique. But the downside is, if the marble falls out of the island, then one of your treasures are put in the maw. And anyone that was knocked over stands up without losing their treasure. Now the last symbol is the super fun part, so this is when all the fireballs are waiting patiently in the scar and becomes a cataclysm, meaning you drop them into Vul-Kar one at a time and nothing gets reset until all the fireballs have finished rolling. Now what's special about these cataclysm cards is that when you play them, discard them to the cataclysm tracker. Once there's 3 of them in the tracker, reshuffle every played action card, including the cataclysm ones, and then add 1 more marble to the scar. Okay, so we talked about getting knocked over multiple times, so what exactly does it mean? If any part of your figure aside from the base is touching the island, or if it's off the island, then you lose a treasure of your choice. If another player knocks you over, they get to steal a treasure from you, but then you also get to draw a souvenir card. If you knocked yourself over, go ahead and put everything back to the box and stop playing. Just kidding. If you knock yourself over, put a treasure of your choice into the maw and draw a souvenir card. Okay, so some spaces will also cause your piece to just fall because they're less stable, and this counts as you getting knocked over. What doesn't count though is if there are table bumps when people are getting angry and frustrated and mad and don't want to play with you anymore. Okay, so we reset our figures as our first action, then move and possibly perform an action for our second action. The third action is to draw a new action card, super easy. And number 4 is to reset the island by returning all marbles to their setup spots, like the Ember marbles on the summit and the fireballs to the scar. Bridges and ladders go back to the original starting point. At this point, if you want to, you can reposition your figure if you're worried about how stable it's going to be. The game is over based on 2 conditions. 1, if a player enters a helipad space while carrying 3 different colored snapshots, or 2, if the scar has 4 marbles in it by the end of the turn. Now from there, the helicopter returns, and you can enter the helicopter by using 1 movement point, and you can also enter it if you have leftover points. So let's say I have 3 movement points left over, and I triggered endgame with 3 different colored snapshots. The helicopter returns, and I can use my 3 points, like 1 to travel to the helipad, and then 2 to the helicopter direction. The number doesn't have to be exact in order for you to return back to the helicopter. Now once you're back in the helicopter, you can choose any treasure from the maw to add to your pile, and you can't leave for the rest of the game. You also don't get knocked over anymore, or stolen from, or passed, but cards can still affect you. You can still play a card in your turn, but since you can't move, you can only perform the action. The game is officially over when everyone's back in the helicopter, or if players have had 2 turns, but the turn the helicopter comes back doesn't count as part of these final 2 turns. Okay, so how do we add up points? You have 3 types of colored treasures, and based on how many of you have of blue, yellow, or red, you get corresponding points shown here. It's 7 points for the Heart of Vul-Kar, 5 points for each snapshot, but only if you're in the helicopter by the end, and the lucky penny is 6 points by itself. So even if you don't make it back to the helicopter, you still add up your points, you just don't get snapshots or access to the maw when you return. Highest score wins, and if there's a tie, it goes to the first person that made it back to the helicopter, or if both of you didn't make it back, then it's the person closest to the helicopter. So let's go over the 3 expansions, starting off first with the last adventure, which adds a 5th player. With this expansion, you put 8 snakes in the snake temples that have this symbol. The golden idol goes on this treasure slab next to the Viper Pass snapshot space, meaning you will have a leftover treasure token, but you can just put that in the maw. You can also choose to play with these player powers by randomly dealing 2 to each player, and then each player chooses 1 while returning the other back to the box. Shuffle the action and souvenir cards into the main decks, and if you're playing with 5 players, then go ahead and add the extra snapshot cards. So 4 new rules for this one. If you're poisoned, and you can only have 1 poison token at a time, you have to play the top action card instead of choosing to play one of your action cards in your hand. If you start with the poison token, go ahead and return it back, and at the end of your turn, if you have 2 cards in your hand, then you can't draw anymore. These green marbles are the snakes, and they act like Ember marbles, so if you have one of these snakes touching your figure at the end of the turn, then you get a poison token if you don't already have one. Afterwards, go ahead and reset the snakes. This giant boulder is placed onto an unoccupied cave, and if you flick it and it knocks over any players, you steal 2 treasures instead of 1. After it's done rolling, it's placed on the side. And the last role for this expansion is the golden idol. If you have to lose treasure, you actually have to give up this golden idol first, which is worth a total of 7 points at the end of the game. Expansion number 2. Like, what if someone had the idea to take this shipwreck themed expansion to the beach to get this picture right here, and then out of nowhere, okay, a wave comes in, rips half your pieces away. How? It's half your pieces away while you run after those pieces, one hand holding the camera, and the other one deciding which pieces to save next. Wow. Man, it would be so dumb. It would be so dumb if someone put the ship that close to the waves. Let's not talk about tragic memories. Pirate Island goes next to the main island. Go ahead and connect the mast and the crows next to the side of the pirate island. Captain's wheel goes here. 3 cannons have their designated spots in the middle. 2 orange ember marbles are on the opposite corners with a 3rd on the skull. A cannonball goes on the crow's nest with the 3 other on the sand. And here are my makeshift cursed sapphire gems. Do they look happy? Because I'm not, for losing the real ones. The gems sit on these icons that have 4 designated spots on the pirate island. And then from there, shuffle the action and souvenir cards into the main decks. Snapshot cards go face up on the side of the island. And if you're using sinister motives, go ahead and give each player a random sinister motive card, but make sure you keep it a secret. Now you can reach Pirate Island by going to these numbered caves 1, 2, and 3. The cursed sapphire gems act like regular treasures, so you can gain them on this base, and you have them stolen as per usual. What's different though is that you can put the cursed sapphire that you gain into the maw and take a second action. Just reset the board and then play an action from your hand. You can only do this once per turn, and the cursed sapphires are worth 2 points at the end of the turn. So the caves 1, 2, 3 are how you get to and from Pirate Island, and the cursed sapphires are like extra turns or extra points. There are also 7 other new rules. One is the crow's nest, which always has the same number of cannonballs equal to the marbles in the scar. Cannonballs will tip over depending on some cards. The bowsprit is where the skull is, and it's a place where you can launch the ember marbles by pressing on this area. The captain's wheel is a snapshot space. I obviously lost the captain's wheel too, but it's unstable, so you have to stop when you reach it. Number 4 are the cannons, which will let you rotate them with the rotate action. Number 5 is the black spot. There's 1 souvenir card called this, and if you have it, you have to give it to another player that you pass, and whoever has it last at the end loses 7 points. Some new action cards will also let you steal as you pass the player. And the last rule is called Sinister Motives, which is what I talked about earlier, where you keep it secret until the end of the game because it affects your final score. And the third expansion is called Crouching Tiger, Hidden Bees. Okay, for this one, you put 3 honeypot tokens onto the treasure slabs and put the replacement treasures in the maw. The beehive, bee sting tokens, and the tiger are all placed next to the island. And just like the other ones, shuffle the action and souvenir cards into the main decks. 4 rules with this one. So pouring the bees has you put 10 yellow marbles into the beehive and pour them through Vul-Kar. If you're touching bee, then you get a bee sting token unless you already have one. And then you can clear the island of the remaining bees. Now speaking of bee stings, just like poison in the last adventure expansion, you can only have 1 bee sting at a time. So if you start with a bee sting, discard it, and when you play your action card, half the movement. Any other effects that drop your movement points happen after this movement is cut in half. For the tiger, if you play an action card that lets you launch a tiger, put it anywhere on the table, press down its tail so it launches, and every player that's knocked over by the tiger loses 3 treasures. With the honeypots we said at the beginning, these act like any other treasures, but if you get one, then you also get a bee sting token regardless if you picked it up or if someone gave it to you. The benefit of honeypots though is that each honeypot is worth 6 points. And the last expansion is actually a mini one called Treasure Trove. You have the options of using any or all of these cards. It's super simple. All you do is add them to the main deck. You have some new souvenirs, Hangru souvenirs affect the game more. Legend souvenirs are strong enhancements. You have injury cards, which are the only ones that are a little bit different. Now injury cards make up their own deck that you shuffle in the beginning, and instead of losing 1 or more treasures, you can actually draw an injury card instead, and its effect happens right away until the end of the game, and there's no limit to how many injuries you can have. And that is Fireball Island. I know there are a bunch of other really good videos out there, but I just wanted to put my own spin on it. And if you want to know what I'm working on next, go ahead and follow me on my Instagram and think about subscribing to my YouTube channel. See you guys on the next one.